Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Data Playbook. We're entering week 17 with Thursday football, but since it's Christmas, we have a special lineup of 3 different games, so I'll go through them one by one. But just before I do, I just want to note that I've updated some of the panels, mainly with defensive information. I want to add some more defensive information to it, so it's not fully complete, but it's almost like the rest of your player panels. So I will show a handful of them at the very end after the outro. So if you'd like to see some of the defensive information at this point, go ahead and stick around till after the outro, and I'll throw up some defensive panels. But other than that, let's get into our normal data for our games, starting with Dallas at Washington. Starting off with our first game, you have Dallas going to Washington, with Dallas favored on the money line, with a spread of 9.5 and a total line of 50.5. Here's your team seasonal averages if you need those numbers. And going through their rankings, you have Dallas as one of the top offensive teams, with a scoring rank of 5, a passing rank of 1, and a rushing rank of 17. Defensively, however, they're one of the worst teams, with an allowed scoring rank of 31, allowed passing rank of 32, and an allowed rushing rank of 20. For Washington, you have a pretty bad offense overall, with a scoring rank of 24, a passing rank of 26, but notably a really good rushing rank of 4. Defensively, it's also pretty bad, with an allowed scoring rank of 27, allowed passing rank of 27, and an allowed rushing rank of 29. Moving into your individual data, and starting with the quarterbacks, you have Dak Prescott and Josh Johnson, because you have Marcus Mariota listed as out right now. And you have Dak Prescott averaging about 19.4 fantasy points per game. Johnson doesn't even average positive territory, but he's only had one game here, which also means I won't move over to the averages for him. But you do now have your averages for Dak Prescott here. And then in terms of turnovers, you have Dak Prescott with 10 interceptions and 1 fumble lost due to a sack. For Josh Johnson, you have 1 passing interception this season and no other turnovers. For their share of rushing, you have Dak Prescott at 12.5% of the rushing carry share and 9% of the rushing yard share. And of course, with Josh Johnson, you don't have enough to get on the board here, so we don't see how much he would impact the rushing game. For your running backs, you have Javonte Williams and Chris Rodriguez, with Williams averaging about 15.4 fantasy points per game, and Rodriguez right about 7. Moving over for their averages, and looking at the turnovers, the only turnovers you have this season come from Williams, with 1 rushing fumble and 1 receiving fumble. And then looking at their share, you have Williams with about 63.6% of the carry share and 67% of the rushing yard share, with the next biggest one being mixed between a bunch of different people. So the one reliable rusher seems to be Javonte Williams in Dallas. A little different story with Washington, where you have Rodriguez with 24.2% of the rushing carry share and 22.9% of the rushing yard share. The biggest portion really going to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And of course, you have numbers in here from Marcus Mariota and Jaden Daniels. So for Washington, this becomes a bit more of a mixed story full of injuries. Getting into your receivers, you have CeeDee Lamb and Terry McLaurin, with CeeDee Lamb averaging about 17.3 fantasy points per game, and Terry McLaurin averaging about 11.6. Here's your player seasonal averages, and with no turnovers, I'm going to go right to the charts, so go ahead and pause the video if you need to look at this in more detail. But looking at their share, you get CeeDee Lamb with about 20.7% of the target share and 25.1% of the receiving yard share. That doesn't quite make him the most productive receiver on Dallas, but he has had quite a few weeks where he was out, so that could impact these numbers. For Terry McLaurin, you're at 15.2% of the target share and 18.4% of the receiving yard share. Also not making him the largest receiver, but he was also plagued with injuries this season. For your second set of receivers, you have George Pickens and Deebo Samuel, with Pickens averaging about 18.5 fantasy points per game and Samuel at about 12.3. As always, flipping over their seasonal averages. And between the 2 receivers, you have no turnovers given up. So then looking at their share, you have Pickens at 25.2% of the target share and 32.8% of the receiving yard share, which does make him the most productive receiver in Dallas. And a similar story with Deebo Samuel at 27.9% of the target share and 25.5% of the receiving yard share, once again making him the most productive receiver in Washington. Wrapping up your individual data with the tight ends, you have Jake Ferguson and John Bates, where you have Ferguson averaging about 11.9 fantasy points per game, and John Bates at about 2. Moving over for your seasonal averages, and for turnovers, the only ones come from Jake Ferguson, with 2 receiving fumbles this season. For your share, you have Ferguson at 19.2% of the target share, and 14.4% of the receiving yard share, and you have Bates with not enough to even be on the chart, so he gets very little of the target share and very little of the receiving yard share. That's also indicated by his seasonal average of 2 fantasy points per game. And that concludes the data for this game. Just looking at some of the direct number correlations, You have Dallas with a scoring rank of 5 against this allowed scoring rank of 27, and the best team at passing in the league against the 27th best team allowed passing rank, meaning they're pretty bad at stopping the pass. So I'd really expect that Dallas would carve up Washington, maybe with CeeDee Lamb, maybe with Pickens, but either way, they should be able to pass the ball with ease on Washington. The one thing that Washington has going for them is this rushing rank of 4 against this allowed rushing rank of 20. So Washington's really going to need to rush the ball in order to keep up. And even with that, they still have this really poor defense on Dallas, which in Dallas games always becomes who can score most fastest. And so as long as Dallas can continue to do that, they probably have Washington, since every single one of their numbers offensively is a higher rank than Washington's defense. But you do have the very poor defense from Dallas, especially with this allowed scoring rank of 31 against a scoring rank of 24, and then this rushing rank. So if Washington really rushes the ball, even if they manage to use their passing, although it would concern me having the third string quarterback in now at this point. So with all of that said, I do think that this still leans to Dallas, and I think the numbers show that, especially with some injuries on Washington. But since it's in Washington, you never know, and we'll just have to watch and see. And there you have it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed and got something out of it. And if you did, leave a like and subscribe. And leave a comment on what other data you want to see in the future. But other than that, I'll see you for the next game. So then now this is what your defensive information looks like. These are just starting with defensive linemen, particularly with your roster, starting with your left defensive end and moving through just like you would with the lineup in ES or any other depth chart. I don't know if I'll go through each and every single one of these. I won't go through them in detail, but I just kind of want to show that I've finally been working on something and got some of this. So some of the things that I have in work is to parse through some of this data and figure out what's useful for different positions, so that way I can just show what's actually useful. Maybe move some of this data up here so that it's not taking so much space. But once again, you do get your averages for these players. And right now, all I have in the charts is how much tackle share they get. So just if there's a big tackler on the team or if they get less, it's kind of something that you can use to compare to their own teammates. So I should have more of these shares eventually, but right now I just have the tackles to set this up and work with it. Here's your left defensive tackles and any information that you might need. I don't believe this is useful information at the moment, but I'll still throw it up. These are your right defensive tackles. These are your right defensive ends. And their averages. Here's your weak side linebackers. Here's your middle linebackers. Pretty impressive that Bobby Wagner gets about 20% of all the tackles on the team, almost a fifth of all tackles on the team in total. And your strong side linebackers. Your cornerbacks here, starting with the left side. I think for quarterbacks, like pass defenses or something would be more useful here, but that's just something I'll have to set up and look at. Here's your strong safeties. Your free safeties. Your right side cornerbacks. And then your nickelbacks.